Okay, let's get into the synthesis a bit deeper now. We're going to now look at these blue and green sliders that you see on some of the parameter controls. Okay, I'm going to explain the principle of these blue and green sliders to you. Once you understand the principle of how they work, it's up to you to go away and experiment in your own free time and get into Ultrabeat on a deeper level. And in the process of learning the principle of how these slider handles work, we will also learn the basic fundamental principle of creating a drum type sound with the Ultrabeat sequencer. Okay, now before we start, I want you to pay attention to something. At the beginning of the last bit, we started off with this factory default kit, completely synthesized. No samples are used for this kit. Okay, now the kick drum for this kit is using a single oscillator doing a sine wave shape at the pitch of G0 plus some extras. Remember that. A single oscillator doing a sine wave at G0 pitch, and that's the kick drum. Okay. Now if you want to play along with me, you want to have your project tempo up here set to 120, because as we learned in the sequencer part of this tutorial, Ultrabeat takes its tempo from here. So have the tempo for your project at 120, and then you can have any kit loaded, choose a pattern, right click, clear the pattern. Again, we covered all this in the sequencer part of the tutorial. Clear the pattern, set it to 16 steps long at the default resolution of 16ths. Okay, now with any kit, go to the first voice, which is usually the kick drum here, right? Right click on the voice and we can initialize the voice. So let's initialize the voice as a sine type voice. Boom, done. And that sets the voice up as a single oscillator doing a soft sine wave shape at the default pitch of C3 plus some extras. Okay. Now a few things to do before we start. The oscillator volume control here has a blue slider on it. Above it says EMV1. Left click, turn that off. Put your oscillator up full. Take the oscillator out of the filter, like that. Okay, now the filter cutoff has got a blue slider on it as well. Below it says ENV3. Left click and turn that off. Now turn the filter off completely. Okay, now the bottom oscillator down here, switch it on, take it out of the filter. Its volume control has a blue handle on it. Above it says EMV2. Left click, turn that off. Turn off the oscillator, we'll come back to that. Okay, next over here we have the voice volume pot, which has a green slider on it. Below it says VEL. Left click, turn that off. Now we just have the basic raw voice volume pot. Put it to 3 o'clock, like that. Okay, and finally, envelope number 4, the amp or amplitude envelope. This envelope is always dedicated to the attack and decay time for the entire voice. That is the combination of all active oscillators. Okay, so slam the attack hard to the left so we have an instant attack, and then drag the zoom to zoom out and set the decay for the voice to 2000 milliseconds, which is 2 seconds. Okay, so the voice will decay away to silence in 2 seconds, which means if I put a beat on the first step at a tempo of 120, the voice will decay to silence on the 16th step in 2 seconds after it's triggered, just before the sequencer cycles back round to re-trigger the voice. Okay, so a single oscillator doing a sine wave shape at C3. Let's hear it. Okay, now remember the factory default kit, as I asked you to observe, right? The kick drum for that synthesized kit used the same oscillator doing the same wave shape but at a lower pitch of G0. So we've got the same oscillator, the same wave shape, right? Let's lower the pitch down to G0 and we should have a kick drum, right? Everything's the same. So I'll put in a 4 on the floor and we should have a nice juicy kick drum. Let's hear it. But we don't have a kick, right? We just have this soft flabby burr 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 at the raw pitch of the oscillator G0. Doesn't sound anything like a drum. It's got no thump or attack at the beginning at all. And the reason for that is the missing extras. Okay, so let's get into it. Push the oscillator up to G1. That just makes it easier to hear. Okay, so we've got a G1 sine wave oscillator decaying away to silence in 2 seconds. Okay, now below the pitch display it says mod off. You'll see this next to quite a few of the parameters. Look, the cutoff for the filter, mod off. The resonance for the filter, mod off. Here on the symmetry for the oscillator wave, mod off, etc. Okay, a lot of parameters have this mod off next to them. Okay, so we're gonna, if we drop this off list down by clicking on off, right, we can assign the parameter, in this case the pitch of the oscillator, to be modulated or changed by any of these things, either of the 2 LFOs or any of the 4 envelopes. Forget this max for a moment, right? Okay, so any parameter pretty much can be modulated or changed by either of the 2 LFOs or any of the 4 envelopes. Now remember, the 4th envelope is always dedicated and fixed as the amplitude envelope. This determines the attack and decay time of the entire voice. And while yes, you can also assign other parameters to follow this same envelope, we've got 1, 2, 3 available spare envelopes we can use, as well as the 2 LFOs, to modulate parameters. So drop down the mod list for the pitch parameter for the oscillator, and we're going to assign it to be modulated by envelope 1. And when we choose envelope 1, the envelope display here will switch to show envelope 1, right? So left click on envelope 1, 1, 2, 3, boom. The envelope display here changes to show envelope 1. There it is. And a blue slider has appeared on the pitch parameter control for the oscillator. Okay. Now, when you modulate a parameter such as the pitch of the oscillator here with an envelope or either of the LFOs, the blue slider appears, and the envelope or the LFO is going to modulate or change that parameter between the red and the blue values. It's as simple as that. So the original parameter value is the pitch of G1. Let's put the modulated value up to G5, like that, 4 octaves above. Okay, so this envelope is going to change the pitch of the oscillator between G1 and G5. Okay, now all envelopes work in time from left to right. At the bottom here, where the envelope is at 0, this is where the voice is triggered. Then the envelope will change the parameter in time from left to right, from the point here where the voice is triggered. Right, voice triggers here. The parameter goes from where the voice is triggered here at its red original value up to the peak, the blue value, and then back down to the bottom, the red value, like that, following the shape. And the time it takes from when the voice is triggered here to climb up to the peak, the blue value, is set with the attack time. So set the attack to about 550 milliseconds, which is just over half a second. Okay, once the parameter has reached the peak of this envelope, the blue value, it then climbs back down to the original red value with the decay time. Set that to also about 550 milliseconds, just over half a second. So we've got a half second attack, a half second decay. When the voice is triggered here, the pitch parameter will go from the red in a half a second up to the blue value, and then in a half a second it will go back down to the red value. Half a second to climb up in pitch to the blue, half a second to climb back down in pitch to the red, following this shape. So it's going to go do red pitch up to blue pitch to red pitch, like that. It's a nice steady linear climb up and back down from the red to the blue back to the red. Okay. Now, an envelope or an LFO will always change the parameter from red to blue back to red, always from the original to the modulated value back to the red original value. But you can invert these. Now, I'm only going to show you this once, but remember you can invert these. At the moment the envelope is going from red to blue to red, lower pitch to higher pitch to lower pitch, but you can invert these, right? So at the moment it's going lower pitch, higher pitch, lower pitch. We can invert these, so I'll put the original pitch up at G4 and the modulated pitch down at G0, and that's going to go from, it'll always go from red to blue to red, but they're now back to front, so it's going to go from red higher pitch to blue lower pitch to red higher pitch dee-wee, like that. Just remember you can always invert these, but the LFO or envelope will always change the parameter from red to blue to red. Okay, so put the original pitch back at G1, modulator pitch up at G5, like that. 4 octaves difference. Okay, straight linear climb up in half a second to the the blue, straight linear climb back down in half a second back to the red. Boo, boo, like that. Okay. Now these envelope shapes have got vector handles, so grab the upper vector handles, pull them out and up like that, and make the envelope into that shape. Okay, now what does that look like?
It looks like my helmet.
Indeed, Darth, it does look like your helmet. You just dropped in for a cup of tea. Yeah, so if you make the envelope like this Darth Vader helmet shape, how do you think the pitch parameter is going to rise up and fall back down when it's triggered here? Well, it's going to rise up very quickly to the higher blue value, hold that blue value for longer across the top of the helmet, and then quickly drop back down to the red pitch. So it's going to go wee-oo, like that. Okay. Right, now grab the upper vector handles, drag them in. Let's make the peak very pointed like that. And now the peak, the blue pitch value, will be held for just a very short time in the middle of the envelope, like this. Do-wee-oo, do-wee-oo, like that. Okay, you getting that? Okay, so now bring the lower vector handles in to make it concaved each side. And now that brief hold of the peak, the blue higher pitch, will be held for an even shorter time right in the middle of the envelope, and it's going to go wee-oo, wee-oo, like that. Yeah, the pitch is rising up all of a sudden, falling all of a sudden right in the middle of the overall time of the attack and decay. Okay. Boo-wee-oo, boo-wee-oo, like that. Right, once you've got the difference between the original parameter value and the modulated parameter value set in distance like that, that's fixed. You can then move the original value around and the blue one follows it, keeping that distance. So let's bring our oscillator down to G0, kick drum pitch, and we're going to get the same thing. Wee-oo, all the pitch rises up and falls right in the middle. Wee-oo, really quick. But now we're just going to go from G0 to G4 back to G0. We just brought the whole thing down an octave. You get it? Right, and now all we do is the attack time. That's how long it takes from when the voice is triggered for it to climb up to the higher blue pitch. At the moment it's half a second. We're just going to bring that time in. Here we go. 400 milliseconds, 300, 200 milliseconds, 100 milliseconds. Okay, now the pitch from when the voice is triggered here rises up to the peak, the blue value G4, in just a tenth of a second, 100 milliseconds. The climb in pitch at the beginning when the voice is triggered is now so fast it's become this slurred thump. You hear it going bloom up at the higher level pitch and then back down, bloom up to the peak G4. So we hear this G4 peak, but with a fast slur climbing up to it, which gives us this sort of bloom, bloom, like that, which is starting to create a percussive thump. Okay, zoom in more and let's get this attack time really fast. 90, 70, 50, 40, 30, 20, 10. Okay, now the attack time is just 10 milliseconds, 10 thousandths of a second. The pitch is rising up when the voice is triggered so fast in just a 10 thousandths of a second that the climb up now we don't hear. It's just this sort of percussive thump climbing up to the higher pitch. So we hear the peak, the higher pitch of G4, in just 10 thousandths per second. But that climb is there nonetheless. And what you get is this sort of boom at the higher pitch. Boom! We hear that high pitch being reached in 10,000ths of a second, and the climb up becomes this slurring thump. Boom! At the high pitch, then back down. Boom! Boom! Like that. But the percussive thump is becoming more of a thump. Okay, let's get this attack time really short now. Here we go. 7 milliseconds. 5 milliseconds. 3, 2. Okay, it's at just 2 milliseconds, 0.002 of a second. Once you get to 2 milliseconds or below, let's put it at 1. The climb up in 1 or 0.002 of a second is so fast that we don't hear the climb anymore. We just hear the higher pitch at the peak being arrived at in 1,000ths of a second. So this ultra fast climb up becomes this percussive thump, and we hear the higher pitch as the thump. Boom! Boom! Like that. And there's your percussive thump at the beginning of your sound. And then all you do is you set the decay time to give the character of the decay that you want, the pitch coming back down. With a long decay time, you get a syndrome type sound. Like that. Because the long decay means you hear the pitch going ew, back down from the blue to the red. Okay, now remember, with this curve, most of the pitch decay comes back down to the original value in just the first third of the overall length of this decay. Okay, and of course you can mess with the decay curve. If it's less tight, shorter decay times, you hear the pitch drop back down because the curve is less concaved. Okay, but if you keep it tight like that, okay, with a long decay time you get a syndrome. Bring it into about a second and you get a squelching sort of thud, like an electronic Simmonsy type, doo, like that. Bring it in from there to around half a second, and you get like a 909 hard thump, because the pitch is dropping so quick you don't hear the pitch climb back down really. You get sort of doo, squelchy thud. Bring it in from there and the thud gets tighter. Okay, but once you come in from about half a second decay time, you start to make the overall thump climb and fall so short, it's getting shorter and shorter, so the thump gets softer and softer. Okay, so syndrome, squelchy thud, 909y thud, 909y thump, and then below that your thump gets softer and softer and softer, because you're making the overall length of the climb and fall thud shorter and shorter, so it gets softer and softer. Okay, that's that. Okay, now you can of course also mess with the attack time. You can have longer attack times, which gives you a sort of blub blub type thump. If you get the timing of that right with the rhythm of your notes, it can make some interesting blub 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 type percussive thumps. Sly Dunbar used to use that slow attack time on some syndromes he used around the time he was sessioning with Black Uhura, and he played those in rhythm so that the attack time went blub 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 blub, blub, and it made this sort of pulsating wobble 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 type pitch thing on the tom. But you know, for your classic drum thump at the beginning, you set it to 1 to 2 milliseconds, so the attack is so fast you just hear the higher pitch at the peak, but the rise up becomes this hard thump at the higher pitch, like that. Okay, now this whole pitch envelope, the attack and decay, the decay is the character of your decay. Syndrome, you know, like syndrome decay, squelchy electronic decay, thumping 909y type, or softer. Okay, this is your thump, and this all happens in just the very beginning of the sound. Thump. The boom that follows the thump, the length of that boom is always set by the amplitude decay, the amplitude envelope decay. This is the boom that follows the thump at the beginning, and the pitch of the boom is always your raw oscillator pitch. The pitch goes up, back down to the original at the beginning, and the boom that follows is at the original pitch. So you then adjust your overall amplitude decay time to get the length of the boom that you want following the thump. finally, the pitch of the thump that you hear at the beginning is, of course, the blue value here. So you can put this up and have a higher pitch thump. Right, because this blue pitch is the pitch of the thump at the peak of this thump envelope, right? This pitch thump, right? At the peak, that's the blue value. So the higher this is, the higher the pitch of your thump is. Now if you put it up really high like that with a long decay time, you get a laser-like syndrome. Like that, yeah? Bring the decay down. Bring the pitch of the thump down, and the pitch of the thump gets lower and lower in pitch, and softer, like that. Okay, and this is the overall length of the decay. That's the pitch of the thump, that's the decay of the thump. Okay, and that's how you make a drum sound. Shimples, but it establishes the principle. This envelope shape, going up and back down again, from original red to blue back to original, is controlling the parameter, changing the parameter over time, and it always goes from red to blue back to red. Okay, so if an LFO or envelope is modulating a parameter, the envelope or the LFO or envelope will always change the parameter from red to blue to red. Simple. That's the principle of the blue slider, right? Okay, now the green slider's almost identical. Okay, let's show a typical one. That people ask all the time. Let's have 3 different velocity notes: loud, very loud, 1, 2 something; medium, 50 something; and very quiet, right down low at 10 thereabouts. Okay. At the moment they make no difference. There is no velocity sensitivity assigned anywhere. We go to our voice volume. This blue pot is the volume of the voice. All active oscillators, right? The combination of all active oscillators. This is the voice volume. If I set it low, my voice is low. If I set it high, my voice is higher. Okay. We can assign the voice volume directly to velocity. Okay, now a few of the parameters you can assign velocity directly to control the parameter. Okay, and voice volume is one of those where you can assign velocity directly. Now when the green slider for velocity appears, it's the same principle as the blue slider. The parameter, in this case the voice volume, will change from green with the loudest back to the original. It's always about the difference between the handle and the original. So the loudest possible notes, the voice volume will be up here, working back down in velocity, quieter and quieter, to the original value. So if I put a big difference between loud velocity and quiet velocity, between the green and the original, these 3 different velocity notes will create a big difference in volume for the voice. Because there's a big difference between the original and the velocity level. If I make the difference between them subtle like that, now this is all the difference there is in velocity sensitivity between loud and quiet. So there'll be much less difference in volume even with these drastically different velocity notes. And that's the principle of the green slider. It's always about the difference between the original value and the velocity green value, loudest to quietest. Okay, and there's your classic velocity sensitivity for the voice. Okay. Now, put that back to 3 o'clock, turn that off, no more velocity sensitivity. Okay, put our oscillator into the filter. Let's have some filter on it like that. Make it nice and trebly. Okay, now if some of the parameters like this cutoff, you can't assign velocity, the green, directly to the parameter. Okay, it says disabled. You have to assign a parameter to be modulated first. Now, if you don't want the parameter to follow an envelope or to be wobbled by an LFO, you assign a parameter to be modulated by max, which basically means the blue slider is the maximum for that parameter. Put it with the red and then set it to whatever you want as your basic value. Bring in the green velocity and we have the same thing. Okay. Velocity sensitivity to the filter. The loudest notes will put the filter cutoff at this trebly setting, and quieter notes, the cutoff for the filter will be less and less open, working back to the original max value. So now we have velocity sensitivity for the filter. So the louder note will have more treble, the quieter note will have less treble. Yeah, the loudest note opens the cutoff up to this really wide trebly setting. The medium note opens it to about here. The quiet note opens it hardly at all. It's always about velocity loudest to quietest. Okay, so there's the cutoff being controlled by velocity. All that is doing at the moment is just making the quieter notes have less treble content. But the voice itself is not velocity sensitive. Now we're simply bringing velocity sensitivity for the loudness of the voice as well. And we have the classic scenario with drum sounds. They get quieter with quieter notes, so the volume gets quieter, but the amount of treble gets less with quieter notes as well. And now we've got them both together. The drum sound, the single oscillator kick, will get quieter in volume with lower velocity notes, and the filter will be softer. Okay, and that is your classic setup for when you're doing drum sounds, because when you hit drums with sticks or beaters, the lower you hit them in velocity, the quieter they are, but the less treble content they have. When you hit a tom with a stick really loud, you get a blam like that. When you hit it gently, you get a boom. Yeah. So the classic setup for a drum voice is to have velocity sensitivity to the voice, so it gets quieter with lower velocity notes, and have the filter set to velocity as well, so the filter rolls off with quieter notes. So the quieter notes are softer in treble content and in volume. Like that. Okay. Okay, let's take all that velocity sensitivity off. So that's velocity sensitivity to the voice, the whole voice, the combination of all active oscillators. But we can apply velocity sensitivity directly to an oscillator volume. Look, you can't assign it like you can here on the voice volume. You've got to put an interim modulator. So set the oscillator volume to max. The blue slider appears, put it with the red. This is our max regular volume level for the oscillator. Now assign it to velocity, the green appears, you know how it works. The loudest note will make the oscillator at that volume, and as the notes get quieter in velocity, the oscillator volume will work back to the max level. Loudest to quietest. And now we're applying velocity sensitivity directly to the oscillator volume. I'll just take the filter off. Okay. This is not velocity sensitivity for the voice. It's velocity sensitivity for just this oscillator. And I'll show you one thing you can do with that. Okay, this oscillator up full. No velocity sensitivity. Okay, it's at G0. So let's bring in the bottom oscillator here and put it to G1, an octave higher. G1. Okay, let's hear that. Put it up full. Okay, there's the oscillator at G1, but it's got no pitch thump. So let's assign the same envelope that's doing the pitch thump on this oscillator here to do the same thing on this oscillator. Modulate the pitch with envelope 1, and let's push it up a couple of octaves like that. So this oscillator is now getting the pitch thump controlled by this envelope, the same as the oscillator number 1. And then we hear them together and we have an octave oscillator pitch thump. Now normally what you do is you just blend the balance between them with their two red volume pots. So I'll have less of the high pitched oscillator, yeah, or even less, or more, whatever I like. But what we can do is, of course, assign velocity sensitivity to this oscillator's volume control. You know how to do it. Assign the modulation for the volume to max. That sets the blue max slider. Put it with the red, bring them back down like that. Add the green. On louder notes this oscillator will be at that volume. Quieter notes it'll work back down to the lower volume. So with the quieter notes we hear less and less of this oscillator. And that way you can apply velocity sensitivity directly to a two oscillator voice and have less of one oscillator heard as the voice is triggered with quieter and quieter notes. Okay. Remember, these can be back to front, just like the blue one can be back to front. If I put them inverted like that, the quieter note will be louder, the louder notes, the green, will be quieter. So we hear more of this oscillator with the quietest notes. You can always invert the green, just like you can invert the blue, and then velocity just works back to front. Quieter is louder and louder is quieter. Like that. Always remember you can invert them. Okay, so that's something you can do with the oscillator volume. Turn that off, turn that off, turn that off. Okay. Alright, put the filter back on for the oscillator. No more velocity sensitivity. Let me show you another one. Remember, this envelope number 1 is doing our pitch thump at the beginning, making the oscillator go up and down in pitch. Thump, thump, but this is just the first sort of half to quarter second, the very beginning. It's the attack of the sound. Boom, thump, and then the boom that follows is set with the amplitude envelope decay, and the boom that follows the thump at the beginning is always at the raw oscillator pitch. The oscillator pitch goes thump up to the higher value and back down to original, so the boom that follows the thump will always be at the red oscillator pitch. So this boom is at G0, like that. Now if I set a nice long amplitude decay, so I get a long booming kick drum, and the filter is set to a very soft setting, so my boom has got no treble content. It's this big massive soft boom. But because the cutoff's been turned right down, all the treble content is taken away from the oscillator completely. So the pitch thump at the beginning has lost all treble content. So we can assign the cutoff to the same envelope doing the pitch thump, envelope 1. Okay, now the pitch thump envelope here, when the voice is triggered, it goes pitch up, pitch down, thump back down in just half a second, thump back down. But now the cutoff is following the same envelope. Now this envelope here, the cutoff is being forced to follow this envelope now. When the voice is triggered, the cutoff is at the red level. In 1/1000th of a second, as the pitch climbs up following this envelope, at the peak, the pitch is at G4, G4, and the filter will have opened up to this blue level, the trebly amount. Then the pitch decays back down and the filter decays back down to the soft setting. So this filter cutoff is now following this envelope. It is forced to follow this envelope. So it goes open treble, close back down to soft, open treble, close back down to soft, just for the thump bit at the very beginning of the sound. Thump, gone. Thump, gone. So the filter will open up at the peak to a trebly setting as the pitch is doing its thump at the peak. Therefore we get the treble content thump at the beginning, and then as the pitch comes back down, the filter shuts back down to the soft level, so the boom that follows has got the soft red setting, but the thump at the beginning gets the filter opened up at the peak to the treble amount. So we get the treble back on our thump at the beginning, but the boom that follows has got the soft red setting because the filter will have shut back down as it follows this envelope back down with the pitch. That way we can get our trebly thump at the beginning at whatever level you set this blue slider to. That's how the filter will be open at the peak, and then the boom that follows the filter will be at the red level as because it shuts back down following this envelope as the pitch climbs back down as well. Okay, so you can do that, and then if you apply velocity as a modifier, you put the blue with the red. Now that means that this cutoff is still absolutely following this envelope. It will open and close only following this envelope, but how wide it's open at the peak is now controlled by the green velocity. So the filter opens up at the peak of this envelope. With the louder note, it'll open up to the green treble setting for the filter. Quieter notes at the peak, it'll open less and less and less. So I have two different velocity notes like that. Okay, the filter will open up following this envelope and close back down just at the beginning, open close. But how wide it is open at the peak is now set with the green velocity. So again we have velocity sensitivity to the filter cutoff, but now the filter cutoff is following the envelope. It will never be open longer than this envelope. And how wide it's open at the peak is controlled by the green velocity. Okay, you should have that now. Okay, that's the envelopes. You should understand that they always change the parameter from red to blue back to red. Okay, let's look at the LFO now. Let's assign the take off the envelope, so no more pitch thump. Put the oscillator up to G1. Okay, no more velocity. Okay, let's put our amp envelope decay back to a long 2-second boom, and we've got a G1 oscillator now, boom, decaying away to silence on the 16th step. Let's modulate the pitch now with the LFO. LFO 1 to pitch, and it's the same thing. This LFO wave shape, whichever wave shape you choose, is going to wobble or modulate the parameter of the pitch between the red and the blue value. Okay, so the red pitch is G1, let's put the modulated pitch to G4. Come on, bloody nightmare to do this, I'll tell you. Right, this LFO wave shape is going to modulate the pitch of the oscillator between red, blue, red, blue, red, blue at the speed set by the rate, which is currently 10 Hertz, 10 times a second. See, this wave shape is wobbling the pitch red, blue, red, blue, red, blue 10 times a second. Okay, so this is the speed of the wobble. And the default is free, which means you move the speed of the wobble here and it's changing the speed in Hertz. How many times a second? If it's set to 2 Hertz, that's 2 wobbles a second. Okay, but it can also be put in sync, and then you get all the usual times, just like if you're syncing a delay. Whole notes, half notes, quarter notes, 8/16, 30 seconds, 64s, etc. Pardon me, and dotted and triplets for those as well. So if I put in sync my rate to quarters, this wave shape is going to wobble the pitch from red to blue, red to blue, red to blue at a speed of quarter beats, giving me a 4 on the floor pitch wobble. Put it to 8ths, we get an 8th speed wobble. 16ths, we get a 16th speed wobble. Okay, so that's the speed of the wobble. Put it back to 8ths. That's the speed of the wobble. Over here we have cycles. Now cycles is normally set to 100 or higher at infinity. Okay, now cycles is how many times the wobble should happen. This is the speed, and this is how many wobbles. Speed of wobble, how many wobbles. Now normally it's set to 100 or infinity, because once the LFO is working to wobble a parameter, you want it to keep on doing that for as long as the voice lasts before it decays away to silence. But you can lower the cycles to specific amounts. If I put it to 3 cycles, the LFO is going to wobble the pitch of the oscillator between G1 and G4 3 times at a speed of 8 and then stop doing it. Okay, so you'll hear 3 wobbles between red, blue, red, blue, red, blue, then you'll hear the original oscillator pitch at G1. 3 wobbles followed by the original oscillator pitch. So we get 3 wobbles at a speed of 8, and then the raw oscillator pitch G1 is heard. Yeah, so that's the cycles. If I put it to 5, I get 5 wobbles at a speed of 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, the original oscillator pitch. Okay, so that's your cycles, which is normally up at 100 or higher. Okay, and then you've got this ramp. If you set it to decay, the amount of wobble starts off but fully wobbling between the red and blue and gets less and less as the voice decays. If you put it to attack, the amount of wobble starts off with very little and works up to the full amount of wobble between the red and blue. You get that? The amount of modulation to the full amount between red and blue comes on gradually with an attack time set by the attack. But so if you have an attack like that and set your speed to 16ths, you get a typical Luigi's Mansion ghosty going like that. Okay, that's your ramp. Alt left click to reset all these parameters to default. Okay. So there, you get it. The LFO is wobbling the pitch at the speed set by the rate, the amount of time set by the cycle, and you can have it fade away or come in. Okay, and then finally the wave shape just changes how that parameter is wobbled. Now, if you're wondering why a square wave wobbling the pitch causes the sonar thing, well, it's because there's no curve going from red up to the higher blue back to the red. It's just like a step. It just goes straight on up to the blue, higher, straight back down to the low red. Higher, lower, higher, lower, higher, lower, switching between the two instantly, giving you this sonar, and the positive and negative cycle of the wave are equal in length, so you get the same amount of high beep as there is gap. Yeah, high, low, high, low, high, low, equal amounts in time, but you can offset the square wave to have more positive, less negative, and then the higher value will be held for longer and the original value will be held for less, so you get a longer beat with shorter gaps. Like that, and then finally, let's push this up to 16ths. There are a couple of random waves, but they're off the wall. You know, but that's your default wave, the sine wave. Okay, so this is the shape of the wave that's wobbling the parameter. That's the speed. That's how many times the wobble should happen, and that's whether you want the wobble to come on or fade away. Okay, modulating the pitch of the oscillator. Let's turn that off. Put the oscillator to the default C3. Let's modulate with the LFO the volume of the oscillator itself. You know how it works. The LFO is going to wobble the volume of the oscillator between the red and the blue amounts. So from quiet to loud to quiet at a speed of 8ths, which gives us tremolo. Let's put it to quarters. Tremolo is where the volume goes from loud to quiet, loud to quiet, loud to quiet. So at a quarter beats, this wave shape is going to make the oscillator go quiet, loud, quiet, loud, quiet, loud, and it gives us tremolo. Like that. Okay, tremolo on an oscillator. You can do all that stuff. Let's make the wave a little bit more square wave and buzzy. Let's wobble, let's apply some filter to it. Softer, more trebly cut off or softer cut off. Right, let's wobble the cut off with the LFO. It's going to wobble it between the red and the blue. So soft to trebly, soft to trebly, soft to trebly. At quarter beat speed, set by the rate. Remember, you can always invert them. It's just going to go from trebly to soft to trebly, the other way around. Okay, so that's wobbling or modulating the filter cutoff, you know. Put it at 16ths. Let's hear it at 16ths. Yeah, whatever. Okay, you must be getting it by now. If I applied a envelope, let's use the spare envelope 3. Let's assign this to modulate the filter cutoff. Envelope 3. We know what's going to happen. Voice gets triggered here. The cutoff will go from red to blue to red, and the attack's about a quarter of a second, just over. The decay's about a quarter of a second, just over. So it's going to go wow, wow, soft to trebly to soft, soft to trebly to soft. Yeah? Okay. Simples. Now that we are modulating the filter cutoff here with an envelope, if we slam that hard to the left, the attack, it means that the instant the voice is triggered, the cutoff will be at the blue amount, at the peak, and then fade back down to the red amount. So it's going to go yow, yow, like that. And the speed it goes yow back down from the treble to the red, softer, yow, is the decay time of the envelope. And that is envelope decay for a filter. Okay, and I'll show you an example of that to finish up. I'm going to load up the that little loop thing that I did, that I showed you at the very beginning. Okay, you know, the break beat thing with a modern twist, right? This. Let's hear that. Here we go. Okay. There go my hard disks starting up. Okay, let me just let the discs start. It's the RAID kicking in. It goes woo, woo, 4 times, 1 for each disc. Okay, now we know all this was explained in the sequencer part of the tutorial, the difference between voice and step. In voice, you choose a voice. This is the synthesis for it. If you make changes to the synthesis here, it's permanent. You're changing the actual synthesis for the voice. If you go to step and make changes to any of the yellow parameters of the synthesis, you're just making a control change for that parameter on that particular step the voice is being triggered. And if you use step, you can choose different steps where the voice is being triggered and make the oscillators on different pitches on those steps to get a melody. Put it back to voice, you don't get to pitch anymore, you just hear the raw voice being triggered on the blue steps. Okay, now this is a 2 oscillator voice. Both oscillators are feeding to the filter and distortion. If I take the filter off, this is the actual sound of the voice without the filter. 2 buzzy square waves, an octave apart with some distortion. Bring in the filter and we get the wah wah wah. And that's because the LFO, number 1 here, this wave shape is wobbling the cutoff. I actually don't need the velocity, right? The LFO here, this wave shape, at 10 times a second is wobbling the cutoff between the red and the softer blue. Soft, just, so it's going wah 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 between those 2 values. Like that. Now the overall voice, if you look at the amplitude envelope here, it's got a very short decay time. It's a short stabby little voice. It only lasts 0.2 of a second when it's triggered. If we bring out the overall amplitude decay time, you'll hear the voice decaying longer, and you'll hear that LFO wobbling the filter 10 times a second. Okay, but because it's a very short decay time on the voice, you just hear 1.5 wobbles or something, then the voice decays away to silence. Like that. Right, that's how I got that sound. Wah, 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 wah. Okay, now, following what we learned in the sequence part of the tutorial, if we have this synth voice, which is the 23rd voice, they've all got numbers beyond them, right? 01, 02, 03, etc. This is the 23rd voice. If it's soloed, and we put the sequencer into step where we get the pitch information, and then we export the pattern by dragging off from here, the exported pattern will have only the synth notes active because the synth voice was soloed. All the other voices in the pattern are muted. But with the sequencer set to step when you export the pattern, you get the pitch information included in the exported pattern or region. So now this pattern or region on the track has just the synth notes active in it with the pitch information, and now we can turn Ultrabeat back to voice, turn its sequencer off, and it is now simply being triggered by the region on the track, which is triggering only the synth with the pitch information, which allows us to then mess with the synthesis for that voice as it's being triggered with pitch. Okay, now we're going to change it so the filter isn't wobbling the LFO anymore. Let's assign the filter cutoff to envelope 3, spare envelope, there it is. Okay, now let's make the overall length of the voice decay longer, so we hear the voice decay longer. Okay, go back to envelope 3, which is controlling our filter, right? So every time the voice is triggered, here, right, the filter is going to go from the red, softer level when the voice is triggered here, up to the blue, more trebly filter setting, and it's going to take just a quarter of a second to do that, and then about half a second to climb back down to the softer filter setting. So every time the voice is triggered, it's going to go wow, 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 like that, following the envelope. Wow, wow, like that. Yeah, wow, wow, softer to blue, treblier back to softer, like that, yeah? Now if we slam the attack, controlling the filter hard to the left, we have instant attack, which means the instant the voice is triggered, the filter is open at the blue trebly setting, and then it closes back down to the softer red amount with the time of the decay. Yeah, so with the decay set to about half a second, when the voice is triggered, the filter is up here at the full trebly, and it goes yow back to soft, yow, like that. A shorter decay time, it shuts the filter back down quicker. A longer decay time for the filter, it shuts the filter down slower. Yeah? Yeah? So what we have now is classic filter envelope decay. Like on a Roland 303 or something. Okay, so this region up here is triggering the synth. We've now got filter envelope decay on the voice. Let's just shorten the overall decay of the voice again to a short stabby sound like that by reducing the amp envelope decay. Right, now this pattern here, let's turn the sequencer off. This pattern, this region on the track is going to trigger that voice, and I will mess with the decay time of the filter. And there you go, that's classic filter envelope decay. And then if you want to, remember this is the 23rd voice in our kit, we can just go for track automation, Ultrabeat, voice 23, envelope 3 decay, which is controlling the filter. Okay, and then let me just move this down, and then I can put in some simple envelope decay moves controlling my filter cut off envelope decay across the pattern like that. I don't know how successful these will be, I'm just making it up, you know. Let's hear that. Yeah, you get it? What's happening? Like that. Classic envelope filter decay. Right, now just delete the pattern, the region that's behind it, but not the automation. Okay, put this back to step, and without the synth instrument soloed now, can I have my mouse back, thank you. Without the synth soloed, but with the sequencer in step when we export the pattern, all the voices in the kit will be active, with pitch included. And now this pattern, or this region on the track, which has got all the active instruments in it, will trigger the pattern, and this automation will work the envelope decay for the filter on the synth. Let's hear that. Okay, and just like on a 303 or other synth, once you've got that filter envelope decay working the filter, you can move the entire filter around and the envelope will keep doing its thing between the red and blue. The blue just follows the red around. So I can change my entire cutoff setting and the envelope will keep doing its thing on the difference between the red and blue as the filter itself changes. Here we go. Like that. There you go. That's classic filter envelope decay. Do you get it? You should get it by now. Okay, so that'll do. You just go away and experiment now. Okay, any questions, ask. And that's it for the synthesis. Okay, it should be enough for you to get your head around it. So let's finish up this whole chapter on the synthesis and sound generating part of Ultrabeat by now going to the final part where we can look at everything to do with playing loops from Ultrabeat. Okay, so I'll see you for that next bit.